Welcome to the Public Safety Innovators Podcast. Connecting you with experts and trendsetters who are leading innovation in law enforcement, private security, and personal protection. And now, your host, Adam Wills.
Welcome to episode 14 of the Public Safety Innovators Podcast. Today is an episode that I am truly excited about because my guest today is someone who I have wanted to have on this show since the time that it was still in the idea phase. Leonard Stock has not only become a good friend of mine, but he is also the founder of the Grappler, a truly innovative and groundbreaking pursuit intervention device that puts an end to vehicle pursuits and saves lives. I first learned of the Grappler several years ago when it was still brand new and I was the undersheriff of the Yuma County Sheriff's Office. As soon as I saw it, I called Leonard and I had to have him come out and give us a demo. The concept was still very new at the time, but I was honored to be the first law enforcement agency to deploy a Grappler in the field and to help Leonard and his team continue to develop the concept into what it is today. The Grappler is still kind of a secret, even in the law enforcement world, and I'm hoping that this podcast is going to help get the word out. I honestly believe that before long, the Grappler will be a name that is synonymous to law enforcement, just like Taser and other brands. In this episode, Leonard is going to share with us his inspirational story about how he came up with the concept and how he pushed forward into turning it into a reality. Leonard's story truly embodies the American entrepreneurial spirit and should be motivating to any of you that have your own ideas to start your own business. Without further ado, here is my interview with Leonard Stock, creator of the Grappler Pursuit Intervention Device. Hey, Leonard, welcome to the Public Safety Innovators Podcast.
Well, Adam, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I am really excited about this interview. As you know, I've kind of been chasing you down a little bit, but that's okay. You've been busy, but I have wanted to have you on the show pretty much since I came up with the idea for it. That's because what you're doing with the Grappler is, I think, the definition of innovation related to law enforcement. And so really excited to have you on, talk about the Grappler, what it does, the problem it solves, what kind of successes you've been having, and that sort of thing, and kind of maybe break this a little bit more into the law enforcement community, because I feel like the Grappler is still a little bit of a secret, if you will. And I think no longer should that be the case. So why don't you tell us about the Grappler? What does it do, and what's the problem you're solving with it?
Well, the Grappler allows law enforcement to seize a vehicle, a moving vehicle, that is. And so right now, I don't know of a device that does fill that void. So you've got tire spikes and vehicle tracking devices, and you have a pit maneuver. But to be able for law enforcement to get up behind a suspect vehicle and to seize it, I think the Grappler solves that for the agencies that are using it right now.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I'm not aware of anything or familiar with anything else on the market. And this is an area which I spent a lot of time researching when I was undersheriff at the Yuma County Sheriff's Office. And you know, we covered a large area, big geographic area, 2,000 square mile county with a pretty small amount of patrol deputies. And so we, weren't immune to all of the high action things that go on in even bigger areas and municipalities. And those of my brethren and sisters that are listening to the show today who work in rural communities can attest to that all the same things that happen in big cities happen out in rural counties. And so we still have to deal with those challenges. We just often have greater space to cover and far less resources to do it. And so we too had to deal with pursuits on I wouldn't say routine basis, but at least with some regularity. And the challenge with that is most of the time when we had pursuits, we only had one deputy involved in that pursuit, at least for a good length of time until somebody else could get caught up or intervene and intercept. And so having that sort of a challenge in big open highways where you can, hit it straight and bury the needle, we had some pretty significant high-speed pursuits, and those are hard to intercept and they're hard to stop. And there is a significant danger factor with that. And so we had to look for something unique. And that was how I came to meet you and know you, Leonard, and learn about the Grappler and take that for a test drive, if you will.
Well, yeah. And you, being the undersheriff, you brought the Grappler to your department, and it was early on in our journey. And you were actually the first field Grappler in the United States. And Border Patrol followed right after you did, like within a month or so. So there are challenges that we've heard from other sheriff's offices that cover a huge rural area with the same challenges that you just shared. There's a one specific sheriff's office that has grapplers, and they also have dash cams. And it's really awesome to see a pursuit and where the grappler catches up to the pursuit, and there are probably 6 to 10 other police vehicles, and the grappler vehicle passes all of them up and makes a capture, and within a few seconds the pursuit is over. It's really awesome to see that.
Yeah, it's really an incredible device. And as you know, I always set out, just part of the way we were, both the sheriff and I, we were very intentional about thinking outside the box and not doing things the way they've always been done, and looking for new technology, new ideas to help us be more efficient. And we went through a bout of time, like I said, where we had a bunch of pursuits, and I started researching different applications, and of course had my own experience with some in the past. In fact, I almost lost my arm one time. We had a pursuit, and I happened to be able to get out in front of it and lay down some spike strips, and threw the spike strips out, prepared to pull them across the road when the fleeing vehicle came through that area. And I was probably dumb in the way I did it. I think it was one of those things where you're trained not to do it this way, but in the moment, when things are heightened and you're thinking about a lot of different things all at once, some of that training and thought just goes out the window. And I put this spike strip out across the road, and I didn't let go of the handle, and I still had the handle in my hand when the car went over it, and it ripped it out of my hand or actually wrapped around my hand, and took my arm and my body with it. And I swear to you, I thought I was going to lose my arm. And that was certainly some of the other devices like that out on the market. While they may be effective in those certain circumstances and situations where you can get another officer or deputy or trooper out in front of it, those tools are effective, but they're also dangerous because you're putting yourself physically in front of this vehicle that's flying at 100 and who knows how many miles per hour right past you. And like you said, I mean, there's nothing out there like the Grappler. There's the only other really pursuit intervention device that I'm aware of that doesn't actually stop the pursuit is a particular device that launches a little suction cup style dart that sticks to the back of a vehicle and has a GPS tracker in it, so that you can essentially back off of the pursuit and then follow the vehicle via GPS. But that still doesn't do anything in the immediate. And if that person is intent on fleeing, they're not necessarily going to stop and slow down and reduce the risk to the public just because you backed off. And so I think the Grappler is really unique in its own right. There's nothing like it, and it is far more effective and safe. And so I wonder if you could share with us, because we've talked about, we've been hyping it up now, Leonard, and why the Grappler is awesome. but can you maybe explain for us, what is it exactly? How does it work? And how is it effective at stopping a pursuit?
Well, the grappler is pretty much a push bar that we install on a pursuit vehicle, and mounts very similarly. And there are switches on the inside that the grappler user would use to deploy the system. And so when a user is ready to make a capture, they would deploy the net. There's a high strength webbing that unfolds, and the user would direct it into one of the rear tires of the fleeing suspect. And the rotation of the tire actually pulls the webbing up and over. It typically locks the tire, and at a minimum, it'll go around the axle. And at that point, the user would just apply the brakes and pull the vehicle to a stop. Now, one thing that you were talking about with the spikes, those are effective. And same with the GPS tracker. Those are good tools for certain situations. We think that the grappler is also a good tool for certain circumstances. In fact, a lot of the grappler field captures are on vehicles that have already been spiked. So, police officer spikes tires. It might be a 100-mile-an-hour pursuit at that time. Probably not a good time to use the grappler at 100 miles per hour. But when that vehicle slows down to 30, 40, 50 miles an hour, and they're not stopping with their deflated tires, it's been very effective for a police officer to deploy the grappler and arrest the vehicle.
So you mentioned, the speed ranges there, and probably not a good idea to deploy it at 100 plus miles per hour. And I know you guys have done quite a bit of testing on your own, but what is kind of well, I guess maybe there's two things here. What's the recommended range? And then what is, as far as live captures go, how many live captures you have, and what is the highest speed that the grappler has been effectively used at in a real world situation?
Well, we did have a state highway patrol before they put their grapplers in the field. They did some testing, and they tested up to 105 miles per hour. So we can say that it's effective up to that speed. As far as a recommended speed, we can't really give a speed that we say everything's 100% safe. What we try to do is share as much data with our agencies with regard to our testing and the field captures that we have. We like to share where certain situations could be a little bit more dangerous than others. So even at 5 miles per hour, which it does work at 5 miles per hour as well, a suspect can turn the wheel into oncoming traffic. So during training, we like to give as much information as we can to point out any possible dangers. And so that would be a no-go as far as a capture. If there was oncoming traffic on a 2-lane highway, you certainly wouldn't want to use the grappler at that moment. So as far as effective speed, we do know that it's been tested to 105 miles per hour effectively. And as far as a recommended speed, we just know that every situation is different, and a police officer has to make the call, or the supervisors have to make a call depending on how important it is to stop a vehicle. We do have 107 mile per hour field capture, and so we do know that it works at 107 miles per hour. That particular capture was about as smooth as can be, but obviously 107 miles an hour, it could have been a rough outcome as well, but it just happened to be a really smooth capture. And right now we have very close to 100 field captures, and they range from capturing stolen vehicles, murder suspects, kidnapping suspects. And so when we talk about the different tools that police officers have in their toolbox, like one of the kidnapping captures was, a couple individuals kidnapped a female, and the police officer was able to come up behind the suspect and arrest the vehicle. And so in that situation, you wouldn't want to use a GPS tracking device because you need the vehicle stopped. And you wouldn't want to use a pit maneuver necessarily because you have a victim in the car. And so in that case, I think the grappler was the perfect tool.
Yeah, and quite possibly the only tool really for that scenario. That's a neat example or case study, if you will, of how it can be applied. I kind of want to paint a picture here because I think it can be hard to envision what you're describing as far as how the grappler itself works, what it looks like, and what it does. And of course, when I publish this episode, I will post in the show notes, I'll post some videos that you guys have from your YouTube channel and that sort of thing that people can check out. But for those that are just listening to the show, I kind of want to paint this picture. And so, you described it as it looks like a bumper. So, I mean, it really looks like a cattle guard type bumper. And you almost wouldn't know in looking at it unless you knew what you were looking for. Just walking up to the vehicle or seeing it on the road, you really wouldn't know that there was anything else going on behind that front bumper than what meets the eye. So that's kind of cool. That's what it looks like. And then as you described it, so this pursuit is happening, and this officer with the grappler that equipped on their vehicle, they get up behind the vehicle and they have a toggle switch in the cab that they flip, and it essentially opens up. So that front bumper opens up and extends upward, I guess. Is that right? It extends upward, and it ends up opening up and looking kind of like a V shape, sort of upright. And then you lower it down when you're ready to actually make the capture. And the goal is that you're trying to, I should say, in between those two arms that are V-shaped, there's essentially a tow strap is what it looks like, that's interwoven back and forth to create this net between those two extending forks. And the goal is to get behind the vehicle, the suspect vehicle, and essentially get their rear driver side, in most cases, wheel in between those front forks. And once it does, it grabs onto that webbing and captures that vehicle by wrapping around the tire and the axle. And then it extends out to create a safe distance between the police vehicle and the suspect vehicle, so that you can both tether and untether it in order to bring that vehicle to a stop. Did I describe that well enough, Leonard?
You did a pretty good job, Adam. But yeah, with the webbing that is extended, the goal is really to make contact with the rotating rear tire. And that rotation does pull the net up and over. And the tether comes in different lengths depending on what agency wants. So some of the higher speed agencies that might be capturing it at those higher speeds, they would use a 40-foot tether. And then some of the city police stations would use a 30-foot. And then the SWAT teams typically like a 15-foot tether because they want to be up close to the suspect. And it more mimics the boxing method that SWAT teams typically use. And so one thing about the 100 captures that we have, I believe about half of them are by SWAT teams. And so part of the goal of designing this device is that we would have a ranch hand type bumper that you were describing, so it doesn't look like the typical police vehicle bumper. And so it has some mesh in it. And so it's been pretty successful as far as suspects not really recognizing what's going on. And along with that, the tactical captures. A lot of times what we hear from police officers is when a suspect has a police officer behind them, they're usually doing the speed limit. Like this is before they police officer lights up. So they're usually doing the speed limit, obeying the traffic laws. And so if all of the traffic is clear and there's a good time to capture that suspect, that it kind of works in well with just trying to capture at as low a speed as possible, because it reduces risk, of course, with the lower speed you have. And so with that ranch style bumper, officer can deploy the net and capture the vehicle with many times, in fact, most times, without the suspect even knowing what happened. In fact, with many of the captures, the suspects don't even know why their vehicle came to a stop, because it's pretty controlled in most cases. So as the police officer is pulling the suspect vehicle to a stop, it's almost like their vehicle's braking on its own. And so we've actually heard stories about SWAT teams that came up on a suspect after the capture, and the suspect is just looking at their steering wheel, looking at their gear shifter, trying to figure out why their vehicle stopped.
That's awesome.
Yeah, those are some cool stories.
That makes you happy. Just totally get into their OODA loop and screw with their little world.
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out is you did touch on it, that the tether is releasable at any time. There is a switch that a police officer can flip, and they can be detached from the webbing. And I will say that at the 100 captures that we have, no police officer has released that for during a capture.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Explain, what under what circumstances would you want to do tethered mode versus untethered mode? What are the advantages and disadvantages of that?
Well, a tether, as long as you're tethered, you will be able to pull the vehicle to a stop, and probably within a few seconds, and probably 5 or 6 seconds. If you were to release the tether, if it was a front-wheel drive vehicle, it may never come to a stop. If it was a rear-wheel drive vehicle, it might take a mile or two before that vehicle slows down enough to come to a stop. So really, using a tether is very effective in bringing a vehicle to a stop. The tether release is really just an emergency release for whatever reason. You can think of several things of, several scenarios of why a police officer would want to release the tether, but fortunately we haven't had any of those issues yet.
So there's really no circumstances under which it's a tactical, intentional, or purposeful decision to release it. There's not really an advantage to that. It's more of just an emergency type situation.
Correct. If like one of the worst case scenarios you could imagine is if several people got out with firearms, the police officer would want to release and get the heck out of there.
Right. So now you guys have made this bumper for different applications, different types of patrol vehicles, not just full-size pickups or SUVs, right? I mean, you've got a version for like the Ford Interceptor sedans and SUVs as well, and other models. Is that right?
Currently, we only have pickup truck and Tahoe models. We are wrapping up the R&D for the Ford Explorer Interceptor. We probably have nearly 50% of the agencies that contact us have Explorers. And so we're wrapping that up, and we'll be able to offer that in a few months, that version. And that will probably go along and be compatible with the Dodge Durango. It's a little bit different system. It's going to be out of aluminum. And as far as the sedan, that is a totally different mechanism, and we're not quite ready to start that one yet. That's going to be a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, maybe my recollection was that you had shared with me that you were working on some of that stuff, not that it was out, but that I had some sort of recollection of you guys having that on your radar at least. But you guys have, if I remember correctly on this too, I'm more certain of this, by the way, but you guys have tested, and I think there's actually a video out there, if I'm not mistaken, of you guys testing this on a full-size F-350 and being able to stop it with the Grappler. Is that right?
That is correct. And what we were using as our chase vehicle is a Tahoe. And so a Tahoe can easily stop our F-350 that we use for testing. There is a scenario where if after the capture we put the F-350 in four-wheel drive low, we can actually pull the Tahoe. So that was something that we wanted to test and share with law enforcement that is possible. There have been some F-350s that were actually captured in the field, and fortunately, what happens after a capture is the suspect either gives up or they bail on foot. So fortunately, there's not a lot of extracurricular activity after a capture other than a suspect bailing or giving up.
Yeah. And now I'm kind of jogging my memory here, and if I remember correctly, I think we actually, when you guys came out to Colorado to do your demo with us, I think we actually did that on an F-350, and I believe we recorded it with our drone, if I remember correctly. Is that still? Do you still have that video? Do you still use that?
I still have that video. I believe we have it on our Facebook page at the Grappler Police Bumper by Stock Enterprises Facebook page, and that was it proved to be very effective with the Dodge Ram that you had for stopping the F-350.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see if we can find that video and maybe put that down in the show notes too, because that was a cool video, because it actually showed the vehicle captured and sitting there roasting the tires, trying to pull away and unable to do so.
Yeah, that was a fun time where we did, I know in the training that we did with you guys, we used that F-350.
Hey, just me cutting in for a quick break and chapter 2 of the Marketing Minute. Tips to help you start your own business post-law enforcement or grow your existing business. I realize I left you on the hook a bit after the first chapter of the Marketing Minute, where we talked about the first of the 7 critical elements of an effective story-based marketing strategy, the hero, also known as your customer. I told you that in the following episode I would tell you what your role was, but the truth is there is still yet another element that is more important than you are. I know, I'm sorry, just set your ego aside for a minute and check it out. The next most critical element is the problem. Again, think back to the last good movie you watched. Immediately after meeting the hero, we find out that they have a problem. There's a bomb to defuse, an evil villain to be defeated, or a girl to be won. You see, the problem is the hook. Nobody cares about the story or what you have to share with them until they realize there's a problem, something to be defeated or overcome. After all, without a problem to be solved, why are you even in business? Now, there is so much more to unpack about the problem, but we've run out of time for this chapter. We will talk more in depth about the problem in later chapters. I do, however, promise you that in the next chapter of the Marketing Minute, I will in fact introduce you to your role in an effective story-based marketing strategy. Check out every episode of the Marketing Minute by going to psi.chat/marketing minute. Now, let's get back into the show. Yeah, so let's talk about training. You mentioned that earlier, that training is something that you do with law enforcement agencies that choose to deploy the Grappler, and that's what you did with us. And thanks for pointing out, by the way, that we had the first one. That's a badge of honor, because I think the Grappler is going to be a household name in law enforcement before long, just like, Taser and some of these other companies out there. So it's kind of a badge of honor for me that we had the first one. I'm disappointed we didn't get the first capture, but hey, that's all right. I'd rather be known for being at the forefront of innovation, and kind of being there on this journey with you has been a lot of fun. But anyhow, you came out and trained us. You trained our deputies that were whose vehicles we equipped, and we even trained the other ones that didn't have it, just so that they were aware. So talk about that. What do you do in training that's included in the price, if you will, when an agency purchases the Grappler from you? Is that right?
That is correct. We train, it's all inclusive. When we sell a Grappler unit, we train the user as well. And training is usually about an hour of PowerPoint going over different situations and being able to show on video what to expect in certain cases. And then about an hour or two of driving out on the track and making a couple of captures. And so in the hundreds of law enforcement that we've trained, everybody feels pretty good after a couple of hours of training.
Yeah. And it was, quite honestly, it was a lot of fun too. That was probably one of the most fun trainings that I did in recent memory. So it was a blast.
I could tell you that police departments really love training with the Grappler. It's totally different from anything they've ever done. And everybody everyone has a blast when we're doing the Grappler training.
Yeah, it's a good little adrenaline rush too. And we always like those.
Yep.
So why don't you kind of lay it on everybody? We've talked about everything it can do and whatnot. What typically does a Grappler charge? And I'm sure that depends upon a lot of different variables, but let's give everybody kind of a ballpark. What are they looking at if they want to deploy the Grappler in their own agency?
Well, one of the things that go into pricing is our travel expenses. So we always have to look at that. But typically around $5,000, we'll get a Grappler unit installed and the user trained, and with a couple of arresting nets. So for $5,000, someone can get up and running. If we go out and install 5 or 10 units, then we can drop that price because our travel expenses get incorporated into the other units. And the arresting nets are $350 each. They are a one-time use. We do offer credit for a used net. And what we'll do is we'll take a used net back, refurbish it, and we could use it for training. And really the goal is to not only help the police officer stay in their vehicle during stopping a vehicle. We think that it will reduce liability for an agency if they can stop a vehicle and prevent it from going through an intersection and hurting someone. But our main goal from the beginning, and my goal, has been to protect the innocent life out there. That's really what our passion has been.
Yeah, and that's a very altruistic, and it's a good passion to have. Like that, there's certainly something to be said about that, and that's your mindset behind it. That you just kind of wanted to do something good, and I appreciate that. Now, you were talking about those nets and what you can do with them afterwards, and that reminded me of some of our conversations that we had in the past. And we were kind of joking one time, I think we were eating lunch at Pizza Hut when you were out here, and we were talking about how Spike Strip, for example, they give you a pin when you have a successful deployment that you can put on your uniform shirt. And we had joked about some ideas of recycling the netting from the capture and putting together some sort of a trophy with that. Is that something that you ended up doing, or is that still just kind of in the plane of thought?
I do remember that conversation about making some kind of a hammock or something out of it.
Yeah, that's right. It was a hammock.
A chair that hung from a tree or something. We haven't done anything with that yet. We do send out a nice personalized Grappler drink tumbler, and that's been pretty popular. And we also give out hats, Grappler hats, and so the users really like that.
Yeah. Well, you're certainly the brainchild behind this idea, the Grappler, and I would like to hear. I'd like you to share, I guess, with the audience. I know the story, so I'm not going to pretend like I don't. But I would love to hear it again, and I'd like you to share with our audience. How did you come up with this idea? Was this something that you'd thought about for a long time, or was it just kind of an aha moment one morning? And what has that journey been like for you from the inception of this idea through getting to where you are today?
Well, I, along with probably everyone else listening, watched these police pursuit shows where it was just high speed, dangerous pursuits. And this was way back in the day. I think it might have been Sheriff John Burnell, kind of rings a bell. But in watching these pursuits, many of them ended with innocent people getting crashed into. And, I was just watching just like anyone else. And even though it was aggravating, I mean, just the injustice of someone who is running from police and they crash and injure or kill someone. And after one of those shows, I must have been dreaming about it or something. I don't remember an actual dream, but I remember I just suddenly awoke, and the first thought I had was a strap going around a tire. And that was the only image I had, but I knew that image was a police officer wrapping up an axle and pulling the vehicle to a stop. And I remember writing some notes, thinking, hey, that might work. And I wasn't trying to come up with an idea. It just hit me while I was sleeping. So the following weekend, my wife and I went out to the outskirts of Phoenix, out in the desert, and we found a dirt road, and I just rigged up a couple of arms with a strap attached to it. And we took our personal vehicles and ran a little test, and we could see that the tire did want to pull some type of a cable over the tire. And so filed for a patent and did get the patent. And then here I am, high school graduate. I didn't really, I wasn't qualified to come up with a device. So I started to pitch the idea to some of the larger companies, whether they were bumper companies like Satina and Go Rhino, and some of the other businesses that have spike strips and that kind of thing. And nobody wanted to take on the challenge. And so
that's interesting. I don't remember you telling me that part. And I think they're probably going to regret that decision here pretty soon.
I did. I tried just making it a point once a week to at least call one of the major players, and nobody wanted anything to do with it. I really just didn't hear anything back. And then I had a life. We had kids, and so I would put this idea on the shelf for 6 months, and then I'd watch a pursuit, and I'd think, gosh, I should at least offer this. And this was kind of a cycle that went on for many years, where it was a lot of work to try to figure out. And then I did go to the IACP. I believe it was late 2014. And I took the best videos that I could have with our product, and we didn't have anywhere close to a product that was ready to market. But our booth was so busy, like we had so many police officers around our booth, and it was really something that we left there thinking that this is something I have to figure out. So for the next month or two after that, I made it a point to call an engineering firm, at least one engineering firm per day, and across the country. And not one engineering firm would help us. And and later I found out from my attorneys that the reason was they didn't want any liability attached to them.
Sure.
And so really, it was really down to me trying to figure out the bumper system along with the webbing system. And then I put it on the shelf a little bit longer just because it was a lot of work. And then ultimately, I really didn't want to go the rest of my life wondering, should I have done it or not? And so that was really the thing that I decided, since I don't want to live the rest of my life wondering if law enforcement would have wanted this, I just decided to go for it, and I jumped in, and I eventually got the product to work and offered it to law enforcement. And at that point, to me, it really didn't matter if law enforcement wanted it or not, because I knew it was a lot of work if they wanted it. And if they didn't want it, then I got to go back to my nice, cushy life that I had doing my thing. Fortunately, some large agencies like Border Patrol and Phoenix PD and some other ones like Arizona DPS. I can mention the agencies that have gone public in some way. We have some other ones that haven't gone public, so I can't really say. But we're very fortunate that some large agencies have put us on the map.
That's a really cool story, and thanks for sharing that. If nothing else, it should be motivating, I think, to other people that are listening, especially if they have their own ideas for things, their own innovative ideas. That don't sit around and live life and regret that you didn't flesh out that idea to see if it would be successful or not. Because at this point, I think looking at what you've done, and I'm convinced, like I said before, that this is going to grow exponentially for you. I think this is really just the tip of the iceberg in the recognition of the Grappler and what it can do. But regardless of where it goes from here, you can now say that your idea has saved lives. It has absolutely saved lives. I mean, over 100 captures, it is very easy to say that you've had an impact on the exact thing you wanted to. You've saved lives not only of officers, but also the suspects and even innocent bystanders, like you said, that are out on our motoring highways. And so, that's really neat. And what a good feeling that has to be able to say my idea has had an impact on public safety and on community safety.
Whenever I get word that there's been a capture, the thing I think about is that vehicle did not hurt an innocent motorist or a pedestrian. And in every case so far, the suspects have been captured, the ones that have bailed. So it is definitely rewarding to know that, at least in those circumstances where the Grappler's been used, those vehicles didn't hurt anyone.
Yeah. Yeah, that's neat. And now you just got to convince them all to those agencies that have a Grappler on their patrol vehicles, they need to get a dog for each of those vehicles too. Then you wouldn't have to worry about people fleeing.
There are several Grapplers mounted on K9 units. So it is something
good.
that
That's smart.
Some of the tactical grapples that occur, they either are by a K9 Grappler or they'll have K9s present so they can catch up with the suspect.
Awesome. So now your background is obviously not in law enforcement. What is your background?
I have been a roofer since 1985. And I say since, and I still feel like I'm a roofer because sometimes my friends need some work done. But yeah, I've been a roofing contractor. We've been, my wife and I have built houses. We have flipped many houses. And so going in and buying a house that's just run down and then just gutting it and putting all new finishings in, that has also been a passion of mine. So it's a lot of fun. We made a few bucks at it, and we had to stop all of that when we got into the Grappler.
So you really kind of just have always been sort of an entrepreneur, huh?
Well, I've always felt like just doing my thing. And really just whether it was starting my business with roofing or the flipping houses, I think that I guess I've been somewhat of an entrepreneur, but never really thought about it that way.
Yeah. Well, cool. Anything else that we haven't covered so far that you want to cover? Anything new coming up that is in the works for the Grappler?
I would like to touch on a couple of things where we just installed some units for our second military base here in the U.S. And so it's really awesome that our military would want to use something I came up with. We also have some really large agencies, and we're just so fortunate that when I look at the list of agencies we have, it's ideal for us when we look at, in the beginning, before we had any agencies, there was a list of agencies. Like, we would want the federal government, like the military is something that I thought about, and some of the large city police departments and the sheriff's offices. And we have those on our list. So it's amazing that we were able to do that. And one thing, we are scheduled to meet with a very large international airport police department that is responsible for keeping the airport safe. And so we think we're going to be protecting a large international airport here within the next few months.
That's cool. Right on. So I guess let's if anybody wants to reach out to you, whether that's to ask for a demo or just chat about more information, maybe follow you on social media or elsewhere, how would people reach out to you, and what does it look like? What's that process look like to ask for a demo?
The demo is, it depends on if we're going to be installing in a particular area. We can do some demos. We are going to be traveling from Arizona to the southeast part of the country here in a couple of months for some demos. But it is quite expensive to perform a demo, so we can't just do it at a request necessarily, just because we have two vehicles we're pulling across the country, and that gets quite expensive. But agencies can contact us by going to either our website at policebumper.com, or they can email us at sales@policebumper.com. They can visit our Facebook page, even message us that way at the Grappler Police Bumper by Stock Enterprises. Just a Google search of Grappler Police Bumper will allow someone to get a hold of us.
All right. And I will, of course, add links to all of that in the show notes, along with some of the other resources we talked about, some videos that we can come up with and things of that nature. Leonard, it's been awesome. Thank you for being on the show. And I think more importantly, we've stayed in touch over the years, even since I've left the sheriff's office. And so thank you for being a good friend too.
Well, Adam, it was an honor to be on your show, and it's been awesome to keep in touch with you over the years.
And we'll have to continue to do that. And you know what? I'll have you back on the show sometime in the future. I'm going to say near future, even when the Grappler is really big and you've got some really cool updates for us. We'll have you back to give an update.
Well, that'd be awesome. Thanks, Adam.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take care.
Hey everybody, thanks for checking out this episode of Public Safety Innovators Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please head over to my website at publicsafetyinnovatorspodcast.com or simply psi.chat, where you can check out episode notes and other episodes from the show. While you're there, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or really anywhere else that you prefer to listen to podcasts. I would greatly appreciate if you could help other people find the show by leaving a review wherever it is that you prefer to listen to the show. I'd love to hear from you if you have feedback about the show, a suggestion on a guest, or maybe you're a public safety innovator yourself and would like to be a guest on the show. please head over to my contact page on the website and you can submit that information there, or just email me at adam@psi.chat. All right, I'll catch you on the next episode.